Real story. In 2014, a quiet suburb of Westfield appeared like any other ordinary American town. Calm streets, trimmed lawns, and houses that all looked safely identical under the evening light. That summer, a man moved into a rental home on the edge of a residential block, expecting nothing more than isolation and routine after a difficult relocation. At first, everything felt normal. Neighbors kept to themselves, the nights were silent, and the most noticeable sound was the distant hum of passing cars. But there was something about the house that felt slightly off in a way that was hard to explain. The air inside seemed heavier than it should have been. Small noises echoed longer than expected. Even settling in felt like being observed through unseen eyes. Still, nothing concrete suggested danger, only a vague discomfort that was easy to dismiss in the beginning. Within the first week, subtle irregularities began to appear around the property. The man noticed small disturbances outside his home that did not match his own movements. Items on the porch seemed slightly repositioned, as if someone had briefly examined them and left them just out of place. At night, faint footsteps occasionally brushed across the wooden deck, though every check of the yard revealed nothing but still air and darkness. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, especially during moments when the house was completely silent. Lights flickered once or twice without explanation, and the sensation of distance between inside and outside began to blur. What started as unease slowly turned into awareness. It was no longer just a feeling. Something about the space around the house seemed occupied, as if presence itself lingered just beyond visibility, waiting for attention that should not have been given. By the end of the second week, the disturbances escalated from subtle to intentional. The man began noticing handwritten notes left in places that should have been inaccessible, tucked under doors or wedged into window frames. The messages were short, inconsistent, and unsettlingly personal, referencing moments from his daily routine that no outsider should have known. Surveillance cameras were installed after the third note appeared, but even before reviewing the footage, he felt an increasing sense of violation inside his own home. Objects inside rooms were shifted during the night, never dramatically, but enough to confirm that someone had been inside while he slept. Sleep became fragmented, and every sound carried weight. The house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a monitored space, carefully observed by something that understood his patterns and was slowly learning how to remain unseen while staying close. As the situation continued into the following weeks, attempts to rationalize the events began to fail. The surveillance footage revealed brief, unexplained movements captured at inconsistent hours, usually near the edges of the frame where visibility was weakest. A shadow-like presence occasionally crossed hallways or lingered near exterior doors, never long enough to identify shape or intent. The unsettling part was not just what appeared, but what did not. Doors that should have triggered motion sensors remained untouched, while objects inside the home continued to shift without logical cause. The sense of isolation became psychological pressure, as if the house itself was participating in the observation. Neighbors reported nothing unusual, and the surrounding street remained unchanged. Yet inside the home, the feeling intensified that something had learned the layout, the habits, and the timing of every movement made within those walls. The presence became more deliberate, almost intelligent in its timing. Disturbances would occur only after long periods of silence, as if waiting for certainty that the occupant was settled or distracted. Lights were found turned on in rooms that had been left empty, and faint impressions appeared in dust where someone had stood briefly before retreating. One morning, the front door was discovered slightly open despite being locked the night before. Nothing appeared stolen, yet the violation felt deeper than theft. It was intrusion without purpose, observation without motive. The psychological strain began to manifest physically, with the man experiencing disrupted sleep patterns and heightened sensitivity to even minor sounds. The house no longer felt like a contained space, but a monitored environment. Every corner seemed capable of concealing something that preferred remaining unseen rather than revealed. By the midpoint of the ordeal, the recordings captured something more definitive. A figure appeared not just outside the home, but inside it, moving slowly through hallways with unnatural stillness. The posture suggested awareness of camera placement, as if it understood where it could and could not be seen. On multiple occasions, it seemed to pause directly facing surveillance points before disappearing from view. No entry points were ever clearly used, and yet the presence consistently returned. The most disturbing detail was consistency in behavior rather than appearance. It never rushed, never reacted, only observed and adapted. Over time, the recordings began to feel less like evidence and more like communication. Each appearance felt like a step closer to understanding the inhabitants' routine. The home was no longer being invaded randomly, it was being studied with patience. As fear reached its peak, the man attempted to leave the home temporarily, staying elsewhere for several nights to confirm whether the activity would stop. During that absence, nothing unusual occurred at the house, at least according to initial reports. However, upon returning, it became immediately clear that the absence had not disrupted anything. Instead, it appeared to have been acknowledged. The first night back revealed new disturbances arranged in a pattern rather than chaos. Objects were positioned deliberately in ways that mirrored his own habits, almost mocking routine. The surveillance system showed the house empty, yet movement still registered at irregular intervals. It was no longer a question of intrusion, but of coexistence. Something remained there, even when it should not have been present, waiting patiently for return. The final escalation came when all recordings captured sustained presence inside the home during a single night. The figure remained visible longer than ever before, standing in the center of living spaces without interacting with objects, simply observing. The most disturbing realization was that it no longer avoided cameras. It positioned itself intentionally within view, as if acknowledging being seen no longer mattered. Shortly after, footage began to degrade in unpredictable ways, with frames skipping and audio dropping into silence.
When reviewed frame by frame, the figure appeared closer in each segment, though no movement between positions was clearly recorded. The progression felt impossible to explain through normal motion. The house itself seemed to distort perception, as if time inside was not functioning consistently. The final recorded night ended with all surveillance systems failing simultaneously. When power was restored hours later, every device reset to factory default, erasing the last segments of footage. No further disturbances were reported, and the home eventually became vacant again. Yet the most unsettling detail came from later inspection. Inside one of the unused rooms, faint markings were discovered on the wall, arranged in a pattern resembling repeated observation points, as if something had been mapping the space from memory rather than sight. The identity of the presence was never confirmed, nor was its origin explained. The Westfield house was eventually rented again, but never for long periods. Tenants reported a similar feeling of being watched, though no evidence ever returned. The case remains unresolved, existing only as fragmented accounts and incomplete recordings of something that never fully left.